Hello everybody, my name's Andrew Poltridge. I'm the Associate Dean International for the QUT Business School, and it's my pleasure to welcome you this afternoon for our first masterclass, How to Innovate in a Crisis, presented by Professor Professor Rebecca Russell-Bennett. But before we get on to the session this afternoon, I'd just like to make an important announcement, a recognition, an acknowledgement of the traditional owners. QUT acknowledges the Turrbal and Yugara people as the First Nations owners of the land where QUT now stands. We pay respect to their elders, laws, customs, and creation spirits. We recognise that these lands have always been places of learning, teaching and research, and we acknowledge the important role that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have played and will continue to play within the QUT community. Okay, so let's move on to the presentation today. The presentation is around how to innovate in a crisis, particularly relevant as to what's happening in the world today. And our presenter is Professor Rebecca Russell-Bennett. I'm going to get it right. I'm going to call her Rebecca, and we'll leave it at that. Being presented by Rebecca. She's one of our senior professors at QUT and one of the most acknowledged here at QUT. She is a professor in our School of Advertising, Marketing and Public Relations, and she's got a long history in marketing, particularly in the area of social marketing. And she's currently one of the leading academics and, in fact, acting director of our BEST Research Centre, which is a Centre for Behavioural Economics, Society and Technology. Rebecca is well recognised in her field, having won a number of international and national awards for both research and teaching and learning. In fact, last year, the Australian newspaper recognised her as the #1 researcher in marketing in Australia. And in terms of teaching and learning, and what you're going to see this afternoon, Rebecca has won national awards for teaching innovations, including our well-known QUTopia program, which allows students to experience real marketing activities by developing and selling a product through a marketing process. Anyway, Rebecca's, as I said, well recognised, and I'm going to hand over to her now as she goes through her presentation. Keep in mind that this is the sort of stuff that Rebecca does normally in her classroom activities, so it's the sort of activities that you can expect to experience if you actually end up doing any studies here at QUT. Rebecca, I'll pass on to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Andrew. Hope that the music got you in the mood. That, in fact, is something that I do quite regularly with my students. Often I have a Facebook page set up for the class, and we pick a couple of songs for the week, and then the students can vote on which song we lead off with at the beginning of the lecture. Nothing like a bit of dead time to, you know, put people off. So it's all about having fun and about learning together. Okay, so thank you very much for the great introduction, Andrew. So I guess my lead research role is with the Centre for Behavioural Economics, Society and Technology. So we are the best centre at QUT, the best centre in Australia and the best centre in the world. I think we're the only one that can claim that particular acronym. And what that means is that we look at addressing social and wicked problems, and I come from the perspective of marketing. So I look at what are the goods and services that we can use to basically improve humanity. And that can be anything from water purification systems right through to cancer screening services. And so these are some of the different organisations that we work with. QUT is the university for the real world. And so one of the things that's very important to us in our classroom is that we bring industry and organisations in to work with us both in the research and the teaching space. And so when I teach my 2 innovation classes, and I do the postgrad innovation in marketing and the undergrad class, we always have an organisation that poses us a challenge, and then we work through that through the assessment to come up with an innovative product or service that might address that problem. And we've done topics from homelessness all the way to this semester we're looking at biosecurity. So what are we going to do today? Well, this is the basic agenda. It's going to be a bit of a quick romp through the field of innovation. We'll do some interactive activities. and we'll look at how the kind of learning that our students do, but also in particular, how do you innovate in a crisis when the natural instinct is to, you know, bunker down, cover your heads and hope for the best. In fact, we're going to sort of show you that in fact is not really the way that we should be thinking in a crisis. We actually need to be proactive, and there's plenty of scientific evidence out there to say that in fact is a better approach. So thinking then, first of all, if this is a lecture all around innovation, well, what is innovation? And I'm a little bit of a fan of the Latin root. And so the word innovation comes from the Latin root innovatus, which means to renew or change. And there's many, many different definitions out there on innovation, reflecting the many different discipline perspectives that come to bear on innovation. So it's not just marketing that looks at it. You have areas in science, you've got human resource management, organisational behaviour, entrepreneurship. There are lots and lots of fields that all deal with innovation. This is, I guess, the definition that I like the most, because it captures the fact that innovation is a process, and it's about transformation. It's about taking an idea into a complete product or service. And innovation is not the same as an invention. So you can sit in your shed tinkering away, inventing things, but it's only truly an innovation when you put the business case behind it and when you actually commercialize it and you bring it to market. And that's what I guess the place that we're going to play a little bit in today is, and I'm going to show you a couple of the techniques that we would normally use in class around ideation of ideas, and particularly using the idea of crisis. Okay, so before we get started, let's just see, you know, how much you know about who invented some of the inventions and the products that we use today. So let me bring up the first of our polls. So let's have a look. Okay, so the first one, in 1994, Pepsi released Crystal Pepsi. It was Pepsi Cola that was clear, and it failed. Why did it fail? What do you think was the answer there? So let's see what you all know. Okay, getting plenty of votes coming in. It's an interesting one because in the 80s, Tab Clear was launched, and it was a similar kind of idea, and it also failed. And then Pepsi came in and repeated it. Okay, waiting for a few more. I'm going to give it another 5 seconds, and then I'll end the polling. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so most people thought it was all of the above, and that is indeed correct. So people's perceptions were that cola should be brown, not clear. There was an association between the colour and the brand. People mistook it. They thought it was lemonade, and people had no idea of why there was the change in colour. And so effectively it failed. The taste was fine, the packaging was fine, the price was fine. It was all around consumer perceptions. So let's have another question. So let's go to, who invented the Band-Aid strip? Who do you think it was? Okay, getting some variation there in the guesses. Okay, we'll end the polling there. And there we go. Yes, most people got it right, Johnson & Johnson. And in fact, it was invented by one of the employees at Johnson & Johnson, whose wife would continually cut herself at home. And so he got a bit fed up with it, brought some stuff home from work, and took an example back to work. And they suddenly realized that what he'd come across was the idea of prepackaged bandages. And it would have stayed as just an invention if Johnson & Johnson hadn't seen the market potential for this and actually then gone into mass production. So what happened is just a quick fix solution to a problem at home turned into something that is a mainstay of the company. Okay, so let's look at another. Let's look at another one. So let's have a look at this one. Which famous brand was originally called back rub? Let's see who knows this one. Okay, seeing a little bit of activity going on. Okay, we'll end the polling on that. Share the results. And yes, indeed, we've got a very smart audience here. Yes, it was Google. It's amazing to think of why they even went with the term back rub in the very beginning. But in the end, they picked Google. And so Google is a play on the word Google, which is a mathematical term for the number represented by the numeral 1, followed by 100 zeros. So for those of you who always wanted to know where the word Google came from, that's in fact where it came from. And let's now do the last one, and that is, which culture invented toothpaste? So let's see what you think. Getting a bit of mixed results coming through now. Toss up between two cultures by the looks of it. Okie doke, let's call a halt to that one and let's share the results. And yes, it is indeed the ancient Egyptians. So when you're getting ready for a bit of a night out and you're brushing your teeth, you might want to think back to the fact that the ritual that you're doing is not a new one. It is in fact thousands of years old, and we can thank the ancient Egyptians for that. In fact, they have discovered examples of ancient toothbrushes. In fact, I've got an image up there on screen for you. Okay, so that sort of sets the scene a little bit to how far back we would cover innovation in a classroom setting, and also starts to get us thinking about why do products succeed, but also why do they fail. Okay, so why do we need innovation? Well, we know that innovation improves the economy and society. It helps you grow your organisation and achieve your goals, and importantly, it helps you meet changing needs of customers by creating value. So we know, for instance, that Blockbuster failed to innovate. We know that they saw the writing on the wall, and instead of, I guess, seeing the opportunity with video downloads or movie downloads, they tried to resist it. They tried to stop the consumer behaviour. So there was a very big opportunity sign that was being waved when consumers were sharing illegally movies. And we saw websites like Napster and Pirate Bay coming out. And what Blockbuster could have done at that point is said, actually, we've got the brand, we've got the link to the movie houses, maybe we should be doing something similar. But instead, they tried to use legal pathways to stop the behaviour. And of course, that opened up the opportunity for companies like Netflix to actually come in, and now Blockbuster as a video store is no longer. So they could have been the Netflix of the modern era, but they didn't want to change what they were doing. A more recent innovation that I've seen, and I don't know how many are familiar with the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, so RSPCA in Australia. And in South Australia, what they've done is they've launched an app called Pet Stop. And what that means is you can download the app and find pet-friendly restaurants, cafes, stores, anywhere near you. And it uses Google Maps to show you where, in your proximity, you can go and find these places. And then you can book if it's a restaurant, or get directions. And so that's a really neat way of saying to people, hey, a pet doesn't have to stop you going places. In fact, there's many places. So why not come and take one of our pets and rescue it? And then you and the pet can have a pretty nice lifestyle. And I think that's a pretty innovative approach for RSPCA to actually do something like that, that's a bit broader than just, you know, saving the animals and trying to find homes. It's also addressing a number of the barriers that people experience about why they don't adopt pets. And the one that's a question mark at the moment is Kodak. So many people may know that Kodak was the film producers with cameras, and been 140 years of success. And then came along digital photography. And Kodak really didn't move with the times. They did produce the paper, and you could buy the paper to print out your digital photographs. But by and large, most people don't actually print the photos they take digitally. They just hold on to them. And so Kodak went from being a household name, the term a Kodak moment, taking a photograph, has almost disappeared out of our vernacular. However, recently, they've reinvented themselves, and they're now a pharmaceutical company. And in fact, they've just won some very large business from the US government with producing a whole bunch of pharmaceuticals. And so we may start to see this brand now be resurrected as a pharmaceutical company. But I guess one would have to say, is it going to work for Kodak? They are most well known for photography. Pharmaceuticals doesn't sit quite as easily. So I've got a question mark there, because really only time will tell on that one. But there's an example of, I guess, a fail, a success, and a question mark. Okay, so moving us into the crisis era. So why is innovation needed in a crisis? You know, why don't we just cut costs, put our head down, and, you know, look up again when the world is better? Well, this is probably one of my favorite articles, if one can have a favorite journal article. And it was by researchers in Europe, and it was released in 2018. And what I like about it is it's a really robust data source. So they used the R&D investment scoreboard data and a newspaper database, and they looked at over 205 companies across a range of different industries and across quite a number of countries in Europe. So it's pretty robust. It wasn't a survey. It was basically the audited annual reports. And what they were looking for is to see, what did companies do strategically in response to a crisis, and what was the result of those strategies? And so what the authors of this paper did was they identified 3 strategic service responses in a crisis. The first is a commitment to expansion. It's not only, is it not stopping what you're doing, it was going harder. It was, you know what, let's look for new markets, let's look for new products, let's enthusiastically expand. The next strategy was about cost cutting, letting go of staff, just pulling back on resources. This is the, you know, bunker down and don't reappear until the crisis is past approach. And then the third approach was a bit of a hybrid. It was a little bit of expansion with a little bit of cost orientation. And so they're the 3 strategies that they basically say you can take in a crisis. Now, how did that work? Well, they found that if you had a commitment to expansion mindset and actually developed new markets and innovated, that your survival rate was 77%. Now, this compared to a cost orientation, so cutting back costs, letting staff go, there was only a 50% chance of survival if you took that approach. And the resource balancing hybrid approach was 61%. So if I had a client coming to me saying, well, what should I do? I'd say, well, do you want to be around in the next 5 years? Do you want to give yourself the best shot at survival? And if they say, yeah, that's what I want to do, then I would say, then the strategy that you need is a commitment to expansion strategy. And that means innovating, and it means investing, doing things differently, doing it better, but it's not about cutting costs and getting rid of staff. And that for me is a really compelling argument for innovation and changing the way we do things. So let's look at some examples in the current crisis of this exact approach of innovation. So here's one example from Australia. It was a rum organisation. In fact, we've seen this with a lot of alcohol organisations in Australia, that they, with very minimal change to their operations, they moved into the production of hand sanitiser. And so this particular organisation was very successful in doing that. Although they had to lay off some casual workers, they were able to retain a majority of their staff and move into the production of hand sanitisers. That would be, to me, an example of that hybrid approach that got taken. The next example was a firm in Melbourne called Beyond a Room. And so they went from vacations to self-isolation staycations. And so this is an organisation that manages Airbnb, and they offered COVID-friendly packages to help drive the bookings for hosts, and also an option for people who chose to self-isolate. And again, what that did was it actually increased the number of stays. So it was fewer people, but longer stays. And so that was very successful for that organisation. This was another one from Melbourne, Dine-in to drive-thru. And so they basically changed their delivery mode to encourage customers to pick up their meals rather than using delivery apps, because delivery apps end up reducing the margin for restaurants because they've often got to pay for that. So if the customers called the eatery directly, they did the drive-through and they got their food delivered. The customers saved on money, and the restaurant made a bit of money through that as well. And it enabled them to keep going, keep their brand, keep the customers, so that when the restrictions eased, they were able to then just pick up again. This is an example of a group in Melbourne and Sydney that went from promotional merchandise to the personal protective equipment and started making the face masks. So in Australia, we had a shortage of this. And so they were able to repurpose and retool. They'd lost a lot of money from client promotional spending because the clients no longer could have events. So when I talk about promotional spending, I mean mugs and key rings and all the things that you hand out at QUT. When we do open days, we have bags and key rings and things we give out. You can't have people coming to a physical open day. Well, you don't need the giveaways. And so they potentially were facing a massive problem this year, and by retooling and using their existing equipment, they were able to adapt and offer a different product range. This organisation in Sydney moved from aged care to airport temperature screening. And so they were able to create a rapid thermal pre-screener, and by simply repurposing that thermal imaging technique or technology. And this is something that when the pandemic is either is under control or being managed, that they might choose to keep. But either way, they were able to adapt and able to continue operations. This is one from Queensland, All-Well Manufacturing, that moved from truck fabrication to defence and aerospace supply. And again, were able to increase their staff actually as a result of this. So these are all great examples, but how do you come up with them? Well, there's a number of different ways that we can do creative thinking. And these are just some of them that come from the literature, the science around creative thinking. We have divergent thinking. We have perspective thinking, where we see the context differently. We have associative thinking, where we see combinations, putting a phone together with camera and you get an iPhone. We have lateral thinking. This is one of my personal favorites, where we bend or break the rules. And then we have systems thinking, where we think in terms of the interconnection, almost like the bio system, where you change one thing and it has a ripple effect. And how do we all work together? And within each approach, there are multiple tools. And I also acknowledge Maastricht University for the creation of this particular list. We work quite closely with Maastricht University in the Netherlands around the idea of service design and service thinking. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you one of these techniques. And this is the lateral thinking or rule breaking technique. And so in the chat, my colleague, Dr. Kate Leatherin, is going to place a link, and this link will take you to a website where I'm going to get you to do a few activities. It's a simple click and drag on an online whiteboard. And so the idea I want you to think about is, what would you do if you only had a budget of 100 Australian dollars? What might you do if you had all available technology? What would you do if there's a radical event that we lost government funding? You couldn't work with study credits. You couldn't fly, you had to stay from home, all of those kinds of limitations. So I'm going to take you through an activity of how how do we break those rules that are the assumptions of what we think we should do? And so one tool that is very useful to brainstorm ideas is the S.C.A.M.PE.R framework. And this comes from a work by an academic by Bob Earl. And in fact, if you Google the term S.C.A.M.PE.R and brainstorming, you'll get a whole bunch of different activities that come up. And this is simply an acronym that says, if we think about how might we substitute something, how might we combine, how might we adapt, modify, put to other uses, eliminate, or reverse or rearrange. And within each of those areas, there are a whole bunch of sub-questions. So I'm going to just check if Kate's, yep, so Kate has put that Padlet link. So what I'm going to do is unshare this screen, and then I'm going to share my Padlet in a moment with you. So what I want you to do, and I'm taking one of the hardest hit industries that has really suffered from COVID, and that is the performing arts area. So I want you to imagine that you are a community theatre company that produces musical theatre starring amateurs. Before COVID, you had one show per quarter that ran from Wednesday to Sunday each week, and you typically charge $50 a ticket. Now, since COVID, you can't hold your shows in your theatre due to social distancing and safety requirements. People are allowed to go out and about, but masks are recommended. So your challenge is you want to continue your shows, and you need funds to cover. You can't do it for free. So we're going to look at using the S.C.A.M.PE.R framework to brainstorm ideas that break our current assumptions about how performing arts should and could be done to come up with a whole bunch of new ways to perform. So if you can click on the link, you can either just play along and watch, or it'd be great to have some of you actually doing this. So I'm going to unshare my screen here, and then I'm going to share my Padlet screen so that those of you who are not able to click through can also see that. So Kate, can I just get you in the chat to let me know whether or not you're seeing that, please? You should be all seeing the Padlet. Great. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so you can see I've got the task in here, and this is something that I would do in a class. In fact, this is something I'll be doing in my innovation class in a couple of weeks' time. So we've got the scenario, we've got the challenge. Now, the way that this Padlet works, it's a very simple online tool. You don't need an account. All you need to do is just double-click anywhere on the screen, and it acts like an online whiteboard. So if you want to have a bit of a go at that, just double-click anywhere, and you'll see a little post-it note come up. I'll just go test, test, like that. And then if you click away from it, you can see it's there. And you'll notice there's a little heart there. You can also vote on other people's ideas. So what I want you to do, and we'll work through these, is I want you to think about how might you substitute things. So I want you to look at the questions that I've got up here and double click next to it to come up with some ideas. Now, some of you might decide you want to start at the bottom. So I've got a whole bunch of questions here so that we're not all in the same space. So start coming up with your ideas to answer some of those questions, remembering we're a performing arts musical theatre, and we have to cover, we need to charge, but we can't do it in the theatre like we would normally do. So start brainstorming what might your ideas are by answering the questions. So if you don't like one of the questions, move on and brainstorm other things. So what rules could you substitute? So a current rule, for instance, in musical theatre is that everybody sits facing a stage indoors. That's one rule. How could we break that? And I can see some ideas starting to come up now already. So you can scroll up and down in that whiteboard right there and start jotting down your ideas as you're thinking. Now, if you see other people's ideas and you really like them, then I'd like you to vote for that by just clicking on the heart. So you can either come up with some ideas, you can vote, or you can just watch and see what everybody else is doing. So I can see a number of ideas coming through. I can see that no one's looking, oh no, we just had one for adapting. What about the idea of put to another use? Who else could use this experience? Could you recycle any waste from this experience? So if you think of waste, could be props, curtains, things that get made for a particular show. What could you do with that? Could you hire it out? Could you give it away? Could you sell it? Under eliminate, are there any parts that you could take out of this experience? So for instance, could you remove some of the seats so that you could actually put people inside? How might you adapt? Yep, I'm seeing lots of great ideas. Oh, partnering with Netflix, get the show on Netflix. Very cool. And hello, Riza from Indonesia. An online musical, an outdoor audience. You could hire the costumes out to schools. That's some really good lateral thinking going on there. Oh, I like the interactive drama play. The sequence of the play can be decided by audience votes. I like that one. You could have an alfresco theatre. You could take the show elsewhere. You've got the actors and the costumes. You can go in search of a theatre. Rather than people coming to you, maybe you go to them. So I can see all sorts of ideas popping up here. Make sure that you have a look at other people's as well and vote for the ones that you like. So if I was doing this for a real client, we would come up with a whole bunch of ideas. I would also bring customers into this and we would co-design up the ideas together. We would then get the customers to start saying, well, which ideas would they pay for? How much would they pay? How would they like to pay for it? So we'd start putting some structure around these and maybe narrow some of the ideas down. I can see quite a number of people suggesting online shows, Facebook live stream. I can see another suggestion for minimizing the number of people in the show. Well, that would make it a bit cheaper too. Do one man or one woman shows, masterclasses, outdoors, theatre in the round, like in Shakespeare's time. That's a great one. I can see there's one, restrict the number of audience members. So what we'd have to think about there, if we restrict the numbers, how do we still make the money? Because often amateur theatre companies run pretty close to the wind in terms of the amount that they can do. So some great ideas coming through there. We'll do one more minute on this and then I'll bring you back to the PowerPoint and what we would do after we've done all the brainstorming here. Great to see the ideas. Make sure you do vote. Theatre dining seems to be pretty important, pretty good. That's great because then you make money not just on the ticket, but also potentially on the drinks that you sell, on different kinds of food packages. With theatre dining, that works well because you have tables, you have fewer people inside the space, and that actually is often what needs to happen with to be COVID safe. Work together with another theatre anywhere in the world. I like that, through a camera and screen and do virtual stand-up comedy. There's one about 2 types of tickets. Some can come into the theatre, some are online. Make the in-person tickets more expensive. Also having online ones which have no limit. Some do, some don't. Have to be very cheap. Yeah, but then if you do it online, you've got a much bigger market. Okay, they're all excellent ideas. So I'm going to stop sharing the Padlet and bring us all back to the PowerPoint show. Okay. All right, so some great ideas coming out there. So lots of great ideas. So if we're capable of coming up with all these great ideas, particularly in a crisis, what stops the innovation from actually occurring? And this is a really nice piece of research that a colleague of mine in the Netherlands put together. They did a heap of interviews with different customers and put together this framework of what stops innovation. And so they basically identified 4 different types of risk. They identified factors such as tradition, norm, the way that we do it, usage pattern. And what they came up with is when you combine the different elements of risk with those blue factors, there's a resistance hierarchy. So the lowest level of resistance is just postponing, saying, oh no, I'll do it later. oh, I'm interested in learning about Google Sheets, but I think I'll learn about it later. For now, I'll just stick with doing Excel. So we postpone. It's the easiest way of resisting. And the factors that lead to postponement are the ones there in the pink dashed lines. They're economic reasons and just our habits. The next level of resistance is rejection, where we go, no, flat out, I don't want to use it. I don't like it. And so the factors that lead to that kind of resistance are economic again, but functional, saying, oh, it's too hard, or social, my friends aren't using it, or I'll look like an idiot if I give it a go and it fails. Usage patterns and the perceived image of yourself, but also of the innovation. And the highest level of resistance is opposition, where people actually go on and become the keyboard warriors and try and stop it. So they're not just rejecting it, they're trying to actually stop others as well and rally the troops. And the factors that lead to opposition are if there's any physical risk, so we're seeing that with COVID, functional risk and social, and traditions and norms and perceived images. So if you ever want to know why people are resisting the way they are, this model or framework will tell you what those drivers are. You can also use it to design up and try and overcome resistance. So if you don't want those resistance hierarchies, here are the factors that you need to address when promoting and developing your innovation. And so a number of those around risk basically alerted me to the fact that there's behavioural biases. So looking at the literature and the evidence base, we know that science says these are all the mental biases that we have that stop us from adopting innovation. So things like confirmation bias. So that's, I only want to do what tells me or confirms what I already think is right. So I'll only look for innovations that confirm my way of doing things. So I won't even see innovations that don't fit with that. Sunk cost effect. Oh, we've already invested in all of these computers. We don't want to use Apple because we've already got PCs. We've already spent the money. So the belief is that we have to stick with what we've got because we've already invested time or effort into it. So these are a whole range of different ways that we mentally justify rejecting innovation. And as human beings, we have an aversion to loss. If something looks like we might lose something along the way, that actually stops behaviour far more than if we think that we will gain something. We are more afraid of loss than we are willing to actually do something that will get us gain. So these are all the little mental things that go on in our brains that stop us from innovating. It even stops us in an organisation coming up with innovation. So if you think yourself about maybe a colleague recently or a friend that said, hey, why don't we change and do this, and you didn't want to do it, chances are some of these biases were at play. And they're certainly at play with our customers as well. So one of the things that we need to unpack then is, well, how do we reduce these perceived risks? How do we make it more attractive financially? How do we reduce the idea it might fail, to perform? How do we reduce the risk of physical harm? How do we reduce the risk of social embarrassment? And how do we reduce those psychological risks? And we need to plan that right from the start. Otherwise, our fantastic idea that we've come up with will fail. So one of the things that we use in the Best Centre is the EAST framework, and it's an acronym. It means easy, attractive, social and timely. And this framework comes from the UK Behavioural Insights team. And there's a lot of scientific evidence that sits around that when we make something easy, when we make it attractive to people, when we involve other people, and when we give it to people at the right point in time, that this can lower the resistance and make it more attractive for people to change and to adapt. And so you may have heard the term nudging. And so these are often referred to as nudging. They're small little efforts to help us move along the change continuum. And so I'm going to give you two examples of organisations that have in fact done this. And I'm showing, I guess, how we use theory to analyse why this worked. So if we looked at the kind of perceived risk for this particular organisation, it overcame a physical risk for COVID, and it used the easy element of the East framework. And this is a colleague of mine, is one of the owners of City Winery. He in fact used to be own an ad agency, and he then decided to go into business and open the first urban winery since the 1860s in Brisbane. In fact, he just gave a guest lecture to my innovation students last week about how this worked. And so you can imagine you're a winery, people come in and they have wine tasting and they have food, and you have these in-house experiences. And then all of a sudden there's lockdown. What do you do? Well, they got all their staff together and they brainstormed up a whole bunch of different ideas. And what they did while Brisbane was in lockdown was that customers were able to order in-home food and wine pairings that was delivered to you. There was a certain time when you logged onto Zoom, and you and 6 other households at the same time all had your home food and wine pairings. And this was curated by a sommelier who took you through the experience that you would normally get in the winery. And so it was the same experience you would normally have with the same food, but it was in your home. They had a 300% increase in demand for the virtual experiences. They kept their customers. They have sent in-home wine tasting kits all around the country. And importantly, they kept all of their staff employed, and they now plan to deliver into Chinese and Eastern markets. So I think that's a really great example of innovating in a crisis. They overcame the physical risk, they made it easy for people, and now they've got a product line that they can continue. They are now back doing their in winery experiences, but they now have an additional service that they are now selling. This was an organisation in Gymea Bay in New South Wales that went from building stages to furniture building. So you can, imagine COVID's had a disastrous impact for anyone in performing arts, and this was a company that built stages for performing arts. Suddenly there's no performances on. So what do? Well, they invented what they call the ISO-King home furniture range, flat pack, fast to assemble. I don't know, for those of you in Australia, when the lockdowns happened, going to the local office works was a nightmare because everyone was setting up their home offices, and all of the discount stores were all selling out of the flat packs of furniture, partly because there was high demand, but also we couldn't get it into the country. There was long delays because of the lack of flights. So in their first 3 months, they produced 10,000 ISO-King products. They've now expanded it to all sorts of different products, and you can see here a picture of those. They were able to re-employ all their staff, and they even hired new staff. When they get back to building stage buildings, they most likely that they will keep this now as an added product line. So they were able to overcome performance and financial risk, and they made it easy and timely. This is a Harvard Business Review article that outlines the strategies. And for me, this really sort of summarizes what I've been seeing in the literature and I've outlined so far to you. And that is, there are 3 basic strategies for overcoming resistance to change. You've got to have a great product or service, but you've also got to work out how do you overcome that resistance. So the first is make it behaviourally compatible. Think about how do you reduce or eliminate any effort? Make it simple. BMW in 2005 developed a fuel cell car that had both hydrogen cell and a petrol engine. And so what that meant was that when the hydrogen ran out, the car auto switched to petrol. You didn't have to stop. You didn't have extra steps that you then needed to deal with. So they eliminated a lot of the problem behaviour. A second strategy is seek out the unendowed. So this is customers who are not currently using competitor products or in the market. So when the Kodak camera in 1888 first came out, they didn't target professional photographers. They actually targeted people who were non-professional photographers, who wanted to be photographers but couldn't afford it. So these were the people who are currently did not have it. They were unendowed. And that grew the market and overcame resistance to change. And then finally, find believers, find those brand advocates, find the people who stand up and speak on your behalf to other people. They form the social element of the East framework. So we know that electric vehicles initially targeted those who are environmentally conscious to get them to speak out on their behalf. So what I've shown you today is the unshaded bit here. So where we see the concept development and ideation. But the bigger picture of what we would normally cover in an innovation class would be all of the other aspects. And so this is the double diamond approach, which is a design thinking approach to innovation. And what we would normally do is start from the beginning and say, well, what's our organizational problem? Who are our competitors? And we'd scope the project. Then we would get a really good detailed understanding of our customers. Who are they? We develop personas, market segments. We'd work out what are the steps that they go through to use our product or service. Where are the barriers and problems now because of the crisis? We would do a service blueprint where we would work out what are the backroom operations and the support functions we need to help our customer move through their journey. We would develop a user problem, and for that user, we would then do the activity that we've just done. We've brainstormed a whole bunch of ideas. What we haven't done today, but that we would do in the future, is we would then need to take some of those ideas and start to prototype them, make mock-ups, test with the customers. But even then, what we then have to do is we need to put the business case around it. We need feasibility and viability. Is it going to work financially? How many customers do we need? What kind of cash flow projections do we need to have to make sure that this is in fact going to work? So there's a whole broad range of the rest of the organisation we need to work with to take this great idea and make sure it's actually going to work. We may then develop a minimum viable product. We would then commercialise, engage with our customers as we then roll our innovation out and hopefully reap the benefits of our success. So that's it from me. So back to you, Andrew, now to manage the Q&A.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. Thank you very much. Yes, questions and answers now for Rebecca. If anybody has anything they would like to know, please type your questions into the Q&A button. You can find that at the bottom of your screen. We'd be delighted to answer any questions around the topic that Rebecca has given. I notice in the Q&A had some questions from students already, more generally than just this topic, and we'll try to get answers back to everybody who's got questions about studying at QUT or conditions about studying at QUT, that sort of thing. But for the moment, with Rebecca here, you've got an expert in the area, so if you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to send that through. And I'm just having a look now to see if any questions have come through. We have one from Jeff. Have any businesses done so well that they have abandoned their original model and gone over to something they innovated during the crisis?
We're yet to really see that. Thanks, Jeff. We're yet to really see, I guess, whether or not they're going to revert or not. I think at the moment, because we're still in the middle of the crisis, we won't really know that. But certainly Stage Kings, for instance, is indicated that they're very likely to continue with the furniture that they've done. Certainly a number of the restaurants that have started doing delivery and home curated services like City Winery, they're going to be keeping those. Whether they will abandon their original model is yet to be seen. And yeah, it's difficult to say because we're not out of the crisis, but no doubt that will emerge pretty soon. So an interesting question. Thanks, Jeff.
And Rebecca, on that, while we wait for the next question, I read some stuff about companies that have innovated successfully have done so because they haven't just innovated their products, but they've leapt into other industries, taking what they've done, but then make a leap into something different and then continue to move that way. And they're the ones that have continued to grow. Is that sort of what's happening here with the crisis? Is that what's
I think so. I think you can either go deep into your own industry and you can just develop other products and services that, a broader suite, or you can go for a diversification strategy for growth, which is doing something in a completely different market, such as going from making rum to hand sanitizer. So that's a massive leap. And we've seen some of those in the past. So for instance, Lego made their first loss in the late 80s, early 90s, and they were quite shocked. And part of the reason that they did that is, we saw entertainment coming out that was very much about technology, and Lego was simply just the building blocks. And what they did was their first success was combining with George Lucas and actually embedding chips that allowed the voices of the Star Wars characters to be embedded in mini Lego figurines of Luke Skywalker and Han Solo. And so by linking in with the entertainment industry, they actually were able to revitalize Lego. And that's basically why Lego is still around today. But that was a pretty scary time for them at that point in time. So they did basically have to make a massive leap into the entertainment industry as opposed to the building block industry that they thought they were in.
Okay, we've got another question here, came through from, so I'm just trying to do this. I think, I'm sorry if I've lost the question here, but the question was generally about what's going to happen with where people are working at the moment. So what's going to happen in terms of where people and how people will work under the current crisis? How are people going to innovate that way?
Yeah, I think I do a lot. I have been working with the Department of Transport and Main Roads. We have a number of projects with them. And one of the things that they're seeing is a definite shift to the work from home area. And I think there are, well, I've seen organisations that have actually said working from home is now not just for COVID, it's actually going to be permanently part of what we do. And what that will mean is that if people want to have a house at the beach and they want to work in the city, they're not going to have to commute. They're actually going to be able to work in a different location to where they're living. They will be able to have colleagues in all around the world, which we already were starting to see. But I think what COVID has done is accelerated something that was already emerging. So I think the whole notion of where we work and where we live is going to open up a massive opportunity for decentralization, for perhaps reinvigorating the regions, for living in one country and working in another country, for reducing pollution. It will help us perhaps change the way that we design our cities. I think this is a real watershed moment for the way that we live and play that is unprecedented.
Okay. We have a question from Elizabeth, which is, what's your favourite example of innovation during this current crisis?
Oh gosh, I think City Winery is probably my favourite because they did it so quickly, and they did they made it fun from home. When we were in lockdown, I know that I did Trivial Pursuit online with my family in the regional Queensland, in Victoria, and I had multiple cameras on the Trivial Pursuit board, and it was all a bit of a nightmare trying to figure out how do you have fun with people online. And that's what I think that's probably the one that sort of has captured my attention, because it is about having fun as well, trying to not have the boredom factor and trying to stay motivated. So for me, it's probably City Winery is the one that I like the most, that just naturally appeals.
Okay. One from Joanna here, which is an interesting one. If the resistance is from within your own team and they're not allowing the product to move into the market because they think it's not good enough, what do you do? So if you're a business owner, you've got a good idea, but it's your own team doesn't believe you, what do you do?
Part of that is it depends on where the ideas come from. I think, again, it comes back to that resistance to innovation. People don't like to change and they don't like things imposed on them. So at the moment, we've got all these things being imposed on us, all of these rules, the government's telling us what to do, everyone's telling us what to do. And what it means is people will push back in their own little domain and say, I just want to be in control of something. So the best way of having your staff come on board with innovation is to start the process with them. To co-design it right from the beginning, help them scope what the problem is, help them go and find out, get them to talk to customers, get them to go and do a bit of research, bring it all in. If you take the journey from the very beginning with them, then they're less resistant along the way. Whereas if it's an idea that comes from someone else and gets imposed on them, I think the way that we're all feeling at the moment is people will just naturally push back and go, enough, I just want to have a sense of control over my little patch. And so we'll dig our heels in. So give them a sense of ownership, bring them on the journey, let them do the viability of it. Say, all right, prove me wrong. Go and tell me all the reasons it won't work, but I want you to give me 2 reasons why it will work and come back with that as well.
Thank you. Another interesting question from Rob, which sort of turns it around the other way. What if you really believe in your product, but it's not possible to do this during the current crisis? So in other words, you've actually got an innovation, but the crisis is stopping it. So how do you actually move forward with that?
So I think there's a number of things. Part of it depends on how much, do you need income? you know, and I know that seems like a silly question, but for some things, have you ever thought of taking a sabbatical? Or working on your business? There's a lot of opportunity at the moment to actually sit back and think about all the things that you'd like to do in your business that you've never had the time for. So if you don't need to be earning the income, particularly with some of the government grants that are out there, maybe it's a matter of reinventing the business and doing what you love, but doing it better. Or taking a sabbatical, saying, you know what, I'm going to take 6 months off, I'm going to study, or I'm going to go and research something, I'm going to, you know, get my mojo back. And then when I am able to then get back into my business, I'm going to bring something additional to it. If you can't do that, then it's just a matter of putting that on ice and saying, what can I do with my current resources in a way that's still going to bring me the money in, that's going to cover my costs, and maybe allow me some thinking time about how I might want to revisit my business. So I think it depends on the financial position that you're in, and the things that maybe you've always wanted to do with the business, but you just never had time, you know, to get onto it.
Okay, thank you. Nancy says, is there a tool that you can recommend to help us to train ourselves in the different types of thinking models, such as divergent thinking, perspective thinking, associative thinking, other than, of course, attending your classes?
I was just going to say that. Come to my class and I will show you that. Look, to be honest, there are a whole bunch of different tools out there. Edward de Bono is probably one of the most well-known in terms of divergent thinking. There isn't any one particular tool. I think it's more about find a credible source. I've noticed that there's a lot of organisations now selling little card packs that help you come up with, you know, ideas, and I've actually bought a few of those to try out. So there is no one way of doing it. I think look for something that's credible, so potentially from a university or from an organisation that is well known. So IDEO, pretty well invented the idea of design thinking. They've got a lot of really good free resources that you can use. The Stanford Design School. There's a whole bunch of really good ones. So really it's about look at the credibility of the organisation. There are a lot of free tools out there. There are MOOCs and online free courses you can do. You know, it's just a matter of finding the right one. There are some good Facebook groups as well. I'm a member of one on service design and innovative techniques, and people are suggesting stuff all the time. And you can go and pose a question like, what's the best tool for divergent thinking? And people will give you lots of ideas. So there's lots of those kind of groups as well.
Okay, question here from Arun, and it might end up being a consulting opportunity for someone that's been listening today. I'm currently working with a preschool and we're switching to a digital at-home curriculum. And from the current parent pool, we're confident that the product is helpful, but we're not sure how to market it successfully.
Okay. So I think the first thing you need to sort of say is, what do you mean by market it? Are you talking about the pricing of it? Are you talking about the promotion of it? So marketing covers the promotion of it, the delivery, and the promotion of it. So I think about how broad and narrow that you've got. One of the things that you could do is to develop it, pilot it, get a prototype, get some testimonials from parents, and basically then build it up. You could always launch it as a free version to start with. Get the feedback, get the word out there, and then you can add features onto it that you could then charge. Or you could develop it up and then go straight to a fee-for-service sort of basis. So there's a number of ways of doing that. I would suggest make sure you've got maybe a marketing officer or a marketing coordinator that you would maybe hire and get them to help you with a marketing plan for that.
Okay, question from, let's get it here, Christine said that most of the businesses are transitioning to other products and services that can be used during the pandemic. But once this ends, won't there be a challenge going back to the original branding? How can businesses prevent from having to start all over again?
Okay, so I think you've got to go back to the core of what is your business about? What is your brand? Many of the successful organizations in the world, their mission statement is actually very broad. So for instance, McDonald's doesn't say anything about selling food. They're a service organization. So depending on how broad or narrow your mission is, that will basically tell you why you're in the business you're in. So it may well be that you're not able to return to your original branding or to your original mission because you've actually changed it. So it's really important to sit back and say, why am I in the business that I'm in? Why did I start the business in the first place? What is the purpose of this organisation? Do I need to leave behind? Have I evolved beyond my branding and need to then rebrand? Or is what I'm doing still fitting within that overarching strategy, and maybe it needs a bit of a tweak? So there's no problem with moving beyond the brand if it's working. But likewise, sometimes you need to let go of stuff, and maybe it's letting go of what the stopgap was and then returning back. But the main thing is looking at it strategically and saying, what business do I want to be in, and how do I want to work in that within that space?
Okay. Got just a couple more here. First one is research and development necessary for companies to innovate ideas and products?
Look, my answer is yes, but it doesn't mean spending millions of dollars. So R&D could simply be a matter of bringing your customers in. And when I say bring them in, you can do this online through workshops, or you could do it just over the phone and chat to them. You always need to be researching what is going on in the market, what are the latest trends, what are your competitors doing, and what do your customers think. Now that can be done very informally, very inexpensively, or it can be done through a complete R&D division. So my answer is yes, it is absolutely necessary, but the scale of it will depend on the resources of your organisation.
One from Irene here, and it's one I guess a lot of people would be thinking about. How would a service business be able to innovate? For example, a financial planner. Great.
Well, that's a good question. One of the things that we teach in the classes I've got is service blueprints. Now, a service blueprint is, if you think of a blueprint of a house where it's got all the component parts, well, this is how we apply innovation to services. So what we do is we put all of the steps that a customer has to do to interact in our service, what they have to do to prepare. So what do they need to prepare to have a financial planning scenario? What do they then need to do in the financial planning interaction? And then what do they have to do after? And then what I do is, under that, you then draw in a blueprint format. What are all the services that you as a financial planner need to provide? And what kind of backroom function and tools do you need? Do you need booklets? Do you need calculators? Do you need software? And then once you've got that blueprint, you look at it and say, can we do this better? So for instance, if you're doing interviews with customers and that's the point, you say, oh, do you have a will? Oh, do you have all your bank statements? And they go, oh, hang on. And then they've got to go away and find in their filing cabinet. Well, is there a way that you could help capture that information through some sort of automated tool so that it's ready when the interview is, where they don't have to go through all their filing cabinets? Think about what happens after the interview. What are the kind of activities that they have to do? Can you minimize them? Can you resequence the service? So there's some really good processes if you do a service blueprint to analyze what do you do currently and how could you do it better. And in fact, even showing that blueprint to a customer and saying, what are the bits you hate? What are the bits where you fall out? You know, you might send out a proposal to a customer and then you never hear back from them. And you keep phoning them going, what do you think? What do you think? Well, you'll lose business that way. How do you make it easier for the customer to move through the journey and actually complete the sale or the process? So it's very easy to innovate a service using the service blueprint process. And you can just Google that, by the way.
Rebecca, we have a couple of other questions, but I note that we've moved past 6 o'clock, which is well over the time that we had set aside for this. We do still have over 100 participants, so obviously it's been an exciting talk. The other questions that have come through, if we can pass those on to you, if there's something you might be able to respond to, that would be very useful. I have one last question for you, because you've been talking about innovation and coming up with new ideas. We always used to talk about first mover advantage. Is there an advantage in being the innovator these days, or are we better off having a look at what other people are doing and then trying to make best use of those ideas?
I think there's a case for both. So for instance, Xerox, the photocopying machine, did not invent the photocopier. They were not the first mover. They waited, they had a look at it, and then they came in. We've seen that with gaming consoles. Sony, with the PlayStation, was not the inventor. They actually waited. But then we've seen other examples where if you wait, you lose. So again, I'm going to use Sony as the example here. So Sony invented the Walkman, which is the precursor to, you know, all our headphones and mobile music. They did market research that said there was no market need for it. In fact, the CEO staked his career on it and decided to be the market mover. And by getting the jump on their competitors who did the same research, got the same answer, and they decided to wait, Sony became the market leader in the headphones, you know, portable music, for a very, very long time in that. So I think it depends on partly what your brand is and what your resources are. If you want to be known as the innovator and being out front, then never ever wait to be the market follower. But if you don't have the resources and you're risk averse, or where failing could just put you completely out of business, then maybe be the market follower. So I think it depends on your capacity to take a risk, your resources, and what's your strategy. What do you want to be known for?
Okay, well, look, thank you very, very much for your talk today. I'm sure that everybody enjoyed that very much. Normally at this point in the proceedings, if we were doing a class, I would come to the front of the classroom, give you a gift, usually a bottle of wine or something. In this instance, I think I will simply take the bottle of wine home and enjoy it myself. So, but I do want to thank you. And for those of you who didn't get your questions answered, we will try to get those answered for you. Thank you very much for attending. There will be some other masterclasses coming up at QUT or through QUT in the near future. So please keep your eye out for those. But for now, thank you very much, everybody, for attending.
Thank you very much.